Arlington National Cemetery gleamed under a perfect blue October sky. Rows of white marble stretched in all directions, a silent formation of America's fallen. Colonel William Bill Harrington stood ramrod straight before a modest headstone, his weathered hand resting on the cool marble. At 94, he still wore his dress uniform with pride, medals catching the autumn light. The brass buttons had lost some shine, but his eyes had not. They remained sharp, alert, scanning the cemetery with the practiced precision of a man who had spent a lifetime watching for danger. James Patterson, 1919-1984. Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army, Purple Heart, Bronze Star. 40 years gone, and Bill still came every October. Same day, same time. "Hello, old friend," he whispered. "Another year. Can you believe they still let me wear this uniform? Getting tighter around the middle, I'll admit." He carefully placed a small model tank beside the flowers at the base of the headstone. A die-cast M36 tank destroyer, hand-painted in olive drab with white invasion stars. Every detail perfect, down to the serial numbers on the hull. His arthritic fingers had spent months on it. "Finished your model, got the camo pattern just right this time." The autumn leaves danced around his polished shoes. Bill didn't notice the young man approaching until he was just 20 feet away. Military bearing, close-cropped hair, the slight hesitation of someone who recognizes a superior officer. "Colonel Harrington?" Bill turned slowly. The young man was perhaps 30, wearing a crisp service uniform with captain's bars. His right arm hung slightly stiff at his side. "I'm Captain Sean Miller, sir, 1st Armored Division." Bill nodded, the old reflex of returning a salute stopped halfway. This wasn't an official meeting. "At ease, Captain. What can I do for you?" "I hope I'm not intruding, sir. They told me I might find you here." Bill glanced back at Patterson's grave. "Annual tradition. You came looking for me specifically?" "Yes, sir. I've been studying your work. The Harrington Doctrine is standard reading at Fort Knox now." A smile creased the old man's face. "They're still teaching that old playbook? I figured they'd have replaced it with computer simulations by now." "Some things don't change, sir. Terrain, cover, lines of sight. Your tactics saved lives in Iraq. Afghanistan, too." The captain hesitated. "And they saved mine in Syria." Bill studied the young officer more carefully. The stiff arm made sense now. Combat wound, recent, judging by the careful way he held himself. "Walk with me, Captain. These old legs need movement, or they'll lock up entirely." They moved slowly along the gravel path, past row after row of identical stones. Bill set the pace, deliberately measured. He'd learned long ago that rushing only made his hip worse. "What unit were you with in Syria, son?" 3rd Battalion, 4th Infantry. We were attached to an armored company. Basic machine. 3 M1A2s. We were pinned down outside Al-Hasaka. Enemy had the high ground, anti-tank positions. Conventional approach would have been suicide. Bill nodded. "So you flanked them, used the dry riverbed for cover." Miller stopped walking. "How did you know that?" "Because that's what I would have done. And if they're teaching my doctrine, that's what they taught you to do." "It worked. We lost one tank, but the crew survived. The others took out the enemy position with minimal casualties." The battalion commander said it was textbook Harrington. Bill resumed walking. "Glad to hear it. Now, what brings you here today? I doubt you tracked down an old man just to share war stories." Miller reached into his breast pocket and removed a folded envelope, yellowed with age. "It's about Staff Sergeant Patterson, sir. He was your gunner in the 702nd, wasn't he?" Bill stopped abruptly, his hand closing around his walking stick with white-knuckle force. "How do you know about James?" "He was my grandfather, sir." The autumn breeze seemed to freeze. Bill stared at the young captain, seeing for the first time the familiar set of the jaw, the same determined eyes. "Your grandfather?" "Yes, sir. I never met him. He died before I was born. But my father told me stories. And he gave me this before I deployed." Miller held out the envelope. "It's addressed to you. My grandfather wrote it in 1983. He never mailed it." Bill's hand trembled slightly as he took the letter. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Block letters, precisely formed, just like every ammunition report Patterson had ever filed. "I found you because there's something we need to discuss, Colonel. Something about the Thunderbolt, about what really happened during the bulge." Miller's voice lowered. "Grandfather's letter mentions the truth that history forgot. He said you were the only one who could set the record straight." Bill looked from the letter to the grave and back to Miller. The past was suddenly present, rushing back like the recoil of a 90 millimeter gun. The truth, Bill's voice was barely audible. After all these years, he carefully placed the unopened letter in his pocket. We need somewhere quiet to talk, Captain, and I suspect we'll need something stronger than coffee. Chapter 2, A Golden Age, Detroit, Michigan, August 1942. The assembly lines never stopped. 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. The arsenal of democracy was running at full capacity. William Harrington Sr. stood at his drafting table in the engineering department of Detroit Tank Arsenal, cigarette burning between his fingers as he reviewed the specifications for the Continental R-975 radial aircraft engine being converted for the new Sherman tanks. His son Bill watched from the doorway, mesmerized by the technical drawings. At 17, he'd grown up with engines. His earliest memories were the smell of motor oil in his father's workshop, the careful disassembly and reassembly of carburetors and timing belts. You're shipping out tomorrow. It wasn't a question. William Sr. didn't look up from his drawings. Yes, sir. Fort Knox, basic training, then tank school. His father nodded, still focused on the blueprint. They're rushing you boys through. 8 weeks instead of 13. Cutting corners. We're needed overseas, Dad. The Germans have been building tanks for years. William Sr. finally looked up, his face lined with more than age. The scar along his jaw had faded to a pale line, but Bill knew the wounds that didn't show were deeper. The Great War had left its mark on his father in ways that went beyond the physical. I know what the Germans can build. He tapped the pencil against the drawing. These Sherman engines run hot. Oil cooler isn't sufficient. Watch your temperatures on long operations. Bill smiled slightly. This was his father's way of saying goodbye. No embraces, no words of encouragement. Just practical advice that might keep him alive. I will, Dad. His father returned to his work. Your mother has dinner ready. Bill lingered in the doorway. He wanted to say more. That he was proud to follow in his father's footsteps. That he would make him proud. Instead, he simply nodded. I'll see you at dinner. The next morning, Bill boarded a train with hundreds of other young men. His mother cried and hugged him tightly. His father shook his hand firmly and pressed something into his palm. A silver dollar, worn smooth from years in his pocket. The one he'd carried through the Argonne forest in 1918. Keep your head down, was all he said. 8 weeks later, Private First Class William Harrington Jr. stood in formation at Fort Knox, Kentucky. The August heat was oppressive, sweat soaking through his new uniform as the company waited for the ceremony to begin. Behind them, row after row of brand new M4 Sherman tanks gleamed in the sunlight. Nervous? The soldier beside him spoke without moving his lips, eyes fixed forward. Excited, Billy. Well, so why don't you? Terrified. I've never even driven a car. Now they want me to drive a 30-ton tank. You'll be fine, Rodriguez. The Sherman handles better than my father's Buick. Before Rodriguez could answer, the company commander's voice boomed across the parade ground. Company, attention! The formation snapped to attention as a line of officers approached the podium. Bill felt his heart racing. This was it. After 2 months of training, they were officially tank crews. Colonel Thomas Barnes, commander of the Armored Training Center, stepped to the microphone. Gentlemen, look behind you. Those M4 medium tanks represent American industrial might. Each one costs $50,000 and takes 8,000 man-hours to build. They are the most advanced fighting vehicles in our arsenal, and they are your responsibility now. Bill turned with the others to look at the tanks. The Sherman wasn't the biggest or the most heavily armored tank, but it was reliable, adaptable, and could be produced in enormous numbers. American ingenuity and mass production answering the challenge of war. Hitler has his Panthers and Tigers, Barnes continued, impressive machines built by slave labor. But we have the Sherman, built by free men, and we have you, the best trained tank crews in the world. Together you will bring the fight to the enemy, from North Africa to France and all the way to Berlin. The speech continued, but Bill's attention was fixed on the tanks. His tank. Soon he would be responsible for a 5-man crew and 75,000 pounds of rolling American steel. The thought was both exhilarating and sobering. After the ceremony, the newly formed crews gathered around their assigned vehicles. Bill found his name stenciled on the side of Sherman number 702, Lieutenant W. Harrington, Jr. She's all yours, Lieutenant. The maintenance sergeant handed him a clipboard with the tank's service record. Fresh from the factory, only 20 miles on her. Bill ran his hand along the cold steel hull. The Sherman stood 9 feet tall, with its 75 mm main gun extending from the turret. It wasn't the most beautiful machine ever built, but it had a purposeful, functional appearance that appealed to him. "Let's meet the crew, shall we?" Bill turned to the 4 men who would form his tank crew. "I'm Lieutenant Harrington. I'll be your tank commander." "Sergeant James Patterson, gunner." Patterson was older than Bill, maybe 25, with steady hands and calm eyes. "Competed in the National Rifle Championship before the war. I can hit what I aim at, sir." "Corporal Thomas Rodriguez, loader." Rodriguez was stocky and strong with quick hands. "I worked in my uncle's munitions factory. I know how to handle shells." "Private First Class Frank Williams, driver." Williams was barely 18 with oil-stained hands and a confident grin. "Been fixing cars since I was 12. This is just a bigger engine." "Private Samuel Johnson, radio operator and assistant driver." Johnson was thin and serious with wire-rimmed glasses. "Studied electrical engineering at City College. I know radio systems inside out." Bill nodded to each man. This was his crew now, his responsibility. "Gentlemen, we have 1 week to learn every inch of this tank before we ship out to England for advanced training. Let's get to work." The weeks that followed were intense. Every day they ran drills, practicing loading and firing the main gun, performing emergency repairs, evacuating the tank under fire. Bill drove his crew hard, but no harder than himself. He was always first to arrive and last to leave, studying the technical manuals late into the night. One evening, as Bill was reviewing the gunnery tables in the barracks, Patterson sat down across from him. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Bill looked up. "Of course, Sergeant. The men are wondering why you're pushing so hard. We're already ahead of every other crew in the company." Bill set down his pencil. "My father was in the tank corps in the last war, drove a Renault FT. Lightest tank they had, barely enough armor to stop a rifle bullet. They sent them against German machine gun nests." He paused. "His tank was hit 3 times. The armor failed. He was the only survivor from his platoon." Patterson nodded slowly. "And that's why you're studying every technical detail. The Germans have been building tanks since before most of us graduated high school. Their Panthers have armor twice as thick as our Shermans. Their gunners train for years, not weeks." Bill tapped the manual. "We can't match them in quality, so we have to be smarter. Know our equipment better. Use tactics and terrain to our advantage." "The men will follow you, sir. They just wanted to understand." Bill nodded. "Tell them we train hard now so we survive later. And tell them we'll ease up on Sunday. Maybe find some cold beer." Patterson smiled. "That'll do it, sir." 2 months later, their Sherman was loaded onto a Liberty ship bound for England. The crossing was rough, with U-boats stalking the convoy. Bill spent the time studying every report he could find about tank engagements in North Africa and Italy. The news wasn't encouraging. German tanks were outgunning American Shermans. The 75 mm gun that had seemed so powerful at Fort Knox was proving inadequate against the thick frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers. In England, they joined thousands of other American troops preparing for the invasion of France. The massive buildup of men and material was unlike anything Bill had ever seen. Endless rows of vehicles, mountains of supplies, and constant training exercises. Their new home was a muddy camp near Swindon. The British winter was cold and wet, a stark contrast to the heat of Kentucky. But the training continued regardless of weather. Bill sought out every opportunity to learn from the British tankers who had been fighting since 1940. It was during one of these exchanges that Bill met Captain Richard Wells of the British 7th Armored Division, the famed Desert Rats who had fought Rommel in North Africa. "Your Sherman is a good tank, Lieutenant," Wells said as they shared a pint in the officers' club. "Reliable, easy to maintain in the field. But the gun," he shook his head. "Not powerful enough," Bill finished. "I've read the reports. The 75 mm will handle the Panzer IVs well enough. But against a Panther or Tiger, you'll need to flank them, hit them from the side or rear. The frontal armor is too thick." Bill nodded. "And we need to get close, under 500 yards. Preferably under 300. And that, my friend, is bloody dangerous. Those German gunners can hit you at twice that distance." "So what's the solution? How did you handle them in Africa?" Wells took a long drink. "We lost a lot of good men finding out what doesn't work. The 17-pounder is our answer now. Nasty piece of artillery. Can punch through a Tiger's armor at 1,000 yards. They're fitting them to some Shermans, calling them Fireflies. Why not equip all the Shermans with the bigger gun? Politics, manufacturing, logistics. The usual barriers to common sense in wartime. Wells finished his beer. Your people are working on solutions too. I've heard whispers about a new American gun, 90 millimeter, I believe. Bill leaned forward. Where did you hear this? Can't reveal my sources, old boy, but keep your ears open. The brass knows the 75 millimeter isn't cutting it. They're looking for alternatives. The conversation stayed with Bill long after. If a more powerful gun was in development, it would change everything. But until then, they would have to rely on tactics and training to overcome the technical disadvantage. As winter turned to spring, the pace of training increased. The invasion was coming. Everyone knew it. Bill pushed his crew harder than ever, running night operations, practicing coordinated movement with infantry, drilling on radio procedures. In May 1904, they received their final orders. The 702nd Tank Battalion would be attached to the 80th Infantry Division for the invasion of Normandy. Their Sherman, now battle-ready with extra armor welded to the front hull and sandbags on the sides, was loaded onto an LST. The night before they departed for the marshalling area, Bill wrote a letter to his father. Dear Dad, by the time you read this, we will be in France. The Sherman is everything you said it would be. Fast, reliable, easy to maintain. The engine runs hot, just as you warned, but we've learned to manage it. The men are well-trained and confident. I've studied every report from North Africa and Italy, every lesson learned. We won't make the same mistakes. I understand now what you never said about your war, the responsibility for other men's lives, the weight of command. I hope I prove worthy of it. The Germans have better tanks, better guns. But we have more of them and good men inside them. American ingenuity against German engineering. I like our odds. Take care of Mom. I'll write when I can. Your son, Bill. Chapter 3, First Blood, June 10th, 1944. 4 days after D-Day. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows of Normandy as Lieutenant Bill Harrington stood in the commander's hatch of his Sherman tank. Through his binoculars, he studied the small Norman village of Saint-Germain-d'Elle. Intelligence reported German armor in the area, possibly a Panzer IV company retreating from the beaches. See anything, Lieutenant? Patterson asked from inside the turret, his eye pressed to the gunner's sight. Quiet. Too quiet. Bill swept his binoculars across the village square. No civilians, no movement at all. Their Sherman was positioned behind a thick hedgerow, the massive earthen bank providing excellent cover. 4 more Shermans from their platoon were spaced along the hedgerow, engines idling. The smell of diesel and exhaust mixed with the sweet scent of apple blossoms. Radio check, all tanks, Bill spoke into his throat microphone. Able 2, reading you 5 by 5. Able 3, clear copy. Able 4, loud and clear. Able 5, receiving. Bill nodded, satisfied. Infantry reports German armor retreating through this village. Our job is to block their escape route. Hold position until ordered otherwise. The radio crackled. Able 1, this is Dogface 6. Infantry is moving into position south of the village. Hold your fire until they flush the enemy your way. Over. Understood, Dogface 6. Able platoon is in position. Over. Bill checked his watch. 0730 hours. The morning sun was burning away the mist, revealing the lush Normandy countryside. Beautiful country for such ugly business. Williams, check our right flank. Make sure we have an exit route if things get hot. Yes, sir. Williams started the engine, easing the Sherman backward to check the access road behind them. Bill continued scanning the village. Movement caught his eye, a flash of gray between buildings. Patterson, 2 o'clock. Building with the red roof. Patterson swung the turret slightly, adjusting his sight. I see it. Looks like a half-track, about 800 yards. Load high explosive. Rodriguez slammed a 75 millimeter HE shell into the breach, the mechanism closing with a solid clank. He loaded. Target identified, Patterson confirmed. Half-track, 800 yards, 2 o'clock. Hold fire, Bill ordered. Wait for the infantry to engage. The minutes stretched on. More movement in the village now. German troops taking defensive positions. Another half-track. A Kugelwagen racing between buildings. Suddenly, the morning was shattered by the crack of rifle fire. The American infantry had engaged, right on schedule. German machine guns answered, their distinctive rattle echoing across the fields. Able platoon, prepare to engage, Bill ordered. Watch for armor. The radio burst to life. All units, German armor spotted. Panzer IVs, at least 3, moving north through the village. Bill's heart raced. This was it. Their first real engagement. Patterson, find those tanks. Patterson swung the turret, searching. Got one. Panzer IV, 700 yards, moving left to right across our front. Armor piercing. Rodriguez slammed a new shell into the breech. AP loaded. Fire when ready. Patterson took a deep breath, made a final adjustment, and squeezed the trigger. The Sherman shuddered as the 75-millimeter gun roared. The shell screamed across the field, striking the Panzer IV on its side armor. A shower of sparks, followed by black smoke pouring from the German tank. Hit, Patterson shouted. Right side penetration. Good shooting, Bill acknowledged. Find the next one. The radio crackled with reports from other tanks. 2 more Panzer IVs spotted. The infantry was taking heavy fire from German positions. Patterson traversed the turret again. 2nd Panzer, 800 yards, moving behind the church. Fire when you have a shot. The Sherman rocked as Patterson fired again. The shell hit the stone wall beside the German tank, showering it with debris but causing no damage. Missed! Adjusting. Before Patterson could reload, Bill spotted movement at the far end of the village. Something much larger than a Panzer IV with a distinctive long-barreled gun. Patterson, traverse right. New target. The turret swung quickly. Bill felt his blood run cold as the vehicle came into clear view. The unmistakable angular shape, the massive gun, the thick armor. Panther! 900 yards, coming straight at us. Patterson found it in his sight. I see it. Jesus, that's a big bastard. AP loaded, Rodriguez confirmed, his voice tense. Fire! The gun roared again. The shell streaked toward the Panther, striking its sloped frontal armor with a flash of sparks. But instead of penetration, the American shell deflected upward, ricocheting harmlessly into the sky. No effect, Patterson reported. The shell bounced off. Load another AP, aim for the lower hull. Rodriguez slammed another shell into the breech. AP loaded. Patterson fired again. Another direct hit on the Panther's front armor. Another ricochet. The Panther had spotted them now. Its massive turret was turning, the long 75-millimeter KWK-42 gun seeking its prey. Back up, now, Bill ordered. Williams threw the Sherman into reverse, the tank lurching backward just as the German gun flashed. The Panther's shell screamed over their turret, missing by inches. The German gunner was adjusting, preparing for another shot. All tanks, retreat to secondary positions, Bill ordered. We can't penetrate the Panther's frontal armor. The Sherman crashed backward through the hedgerow, Williams expertly navigating to their fallback position. The other tanks were doing the same, pulling back under the covering fire of the infantry. Once in their new position, 200 yards further back, Bill quickly assessed the situation. The Panther was advancing slowly, accompanied by infantry. 2 Panzer IVs were visible now, 1 damaged from their initial engagement. Able 3, Able 5, flank left through the orchard. Try to get a side shot on that Panther. The rest of us will provide covering fire. Understood, Able 1. Moving now. Bill watched as 2 Shermans broke off, racing through the apple orchard to get around the Panther's flank. It was a desperate move, but their only chance. The 75-millimeter gun simply couldn't penetrate the German tank's frontal armor. Fire smoke rounds. Give them cover. Patterson loaded and fired smoke shells, creating a thick screen between the advancing Germans and the flanking Shermans. For a tense minute, the battlefield was obscured. Then came the sound of guns firing from the orchard. 1 Sherman, then the other. The radio crackled with excited voices. Hit! Side penetration on the Panther. Panther is burning. Crew bailing out. Bill allowed himself a moment of relief. They had done it, used tactics to overcome superior German technology, just as he had planned. But the victory was short-lived. Another Panther appeared at the edge of the village, its gun already trained on the orchard. The distinctive crack of its 75mm was followed instantly by an explosion. Able 3 is hit. Direct hit on the turret. Bill watched in horror as black smoke poured from the stricken Sherman. No crew emerged. A direct hit to the turret often meant the ammunition had exploded, killing everyone inside instantly. Able 5, get out of there! Too late. The 2nd Sherman was hit as it tried to reverse out of the orchard. The shell penetrated the front hull, igniting the ammunition and fuel. The tanker erupted in a fireball that reached into the sky. All remaining tanks, full retreat. Fall back to Rally Point, Charlie. Williams didn't need to be told twice. He threw the Sherman into reverse, then executed a quick turn once they were behind cover. The tank raced down the dirt road away from the deadly German guns. At the rally point, a small crossroads 2 miles from the village, Bill assessed the damage. 2 tanks lost with all crew. A 3rd damaged but repairable. 7 men dead in less than 10 minutes of combat. The infantry commander, Captain Lewis, approached Bill's tank. His uniform was dirt-stained, his face grim. "What the hell happened out there, Harrington? You were supposed to block their escape." Bill climbed down from his tank, legs shaky from adrenaline. "German armor was heavier than reported, sir. Panthers, not just Panzer IVs. Our 75mm couldn't penetrate their frontal armor. So you retreated without orders." "I made a tactical decision to preserve what was left of my platoon, sir. We lost 2 tanks trying to flank the first Panther." Lewis's anger seemed to deflate slightly. "2 tanks? How many men?" "10, all dead." Lewis rubbed his face, suddenly looking much older than his 30 years. "This is the 3rd report I've had of Panthers in this sector. HQ still doesn't believe they've committed heavy armor to this area." "With respect, sir, HQ is wrong. I saw them with my own eyes. 2 Panthers, plus the Panzer IVs. Our intelligence is flawed. Write up a detailed report. Everything you saw, every shot fired, every effect observed. I'll send it up the chain with my endorsement." Lewis looked back toward the distant sound of gunfire. "In the meantime, we have to find another way around that village." That night, Bill sat alone in his tent, writing his report by flashlight. He described in meticulous detail the engagement with the Panther, the failed attempts to penetrate its frontal armor, the successful flank attack, and the devastating German response. His hands shook slightly as he wrote the names of the men lost. 10 good men who had trained with him at Fort Knox. 10 letters he would write to families explaining how their sons, husbands, and fathers had died. When the report was finished, he added a personal assessment. "The M4 Sherman 75mm gun is wholly inadequate against German Panther and Tiger tanks. Even at close range, 300 yards, our armor-piercing rounds failed to penetrate the Panther's frontal armor. Successful engagement was only possible by flanking maneuvers, which exposed our tanks to deadly counterfire. Recommendation: urgent development and deployment of tanks with more powerful guns capable of defeating German heavy armor from frontal aspects at combat ranges." He signed the report and sealed it in an envelope. In the morning, he would give it to Captain Lewis for transmission to headquarters. Whether anyone would listen was another matter entirely. Later that week, the report made its way to divisional headquarters, where it landed on the desk of Colonel Robert Blackwood, Chief of Armored Operations for the division. Blackwood read it with a deepening frown. When he finished, he called in his aide. "Find me everything we have on this Lieutenant Harrington. Training records, commanding officer assessments, everything." While he waited, Blackwood reread the report, paying special attention to the recommendations. Another junior officer who thought he knew better than the generals in the War Department. The Sherman had been designed according to established doctrine. Medium tanks should engage infantry and soft targets, leaving enemy tanks to specialized tank destroyers. If Harrington had followed doctrine and called in tank destroyer support instead of engaging the Panthers directly, those men might still be alive. The aide returned with a slim folder. "Lieutenant William Harrington, Jr., sir, graduated top of his class at Fort Knox. Superior ratings in gunnery and tactics." His commanding officer noted, "exceptional technical knowledge and tactical judgment." Family? Father worked for Detroit Tank Arsenal, Engineering Department, served in the Great War Tank Corps. Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. "That explains the technical knowledge and the attitude." Another armchair general who thinks equipment is more important than doctrine and discipline. He made a note on the report. Lieutenant Harrington exceeded his orders by engaging German heavy armor directly instead of calling for appropriate support. While his tactical response after initial contact shows initiative, his recommendations regarding equipment are beyond his authority and expertise. No further action required on equipment assessment. Recommend additional training in combined arms doctrine. Blackwood signed the note and placed the report in his outbox. As far as he was concerned, the matter was closed. The War Department had thousands of Shermans in production. They weren't going to change the main armament based on one lieutenant's experience in his first engagement. What Blackwood didn't know was that Harrington's report wasn't the only one raising concerns about the Sherman's gun. Similar reports were coming in from all across the Normandy front, and some of those reports were finding their way to officers who were more willing to listen. Chapter 4, The Mentor. July 1944. The Norman countryside was scarred by war. Shell craters dotted the once pristine fields. Hedgerows were broken by the passage of tanks and troops. Villages lay in ruins. 6 weeks after D-Day, the Allied advance had slowed to a crawl against fierce German resistance. Bill Harrington's tank platoon had been involved in a dozen engagements since that first disastrous encounter with the Panthers. They had learned to avoid direct confrontation with German heavy armor, using terrain and coordination with infantry and artillery to overcome their disadvantage in firepower. But the losses continued to mount. The replacement crews that joined them were even less experienced than they had been coming off the boat. Training them while in active combat was a constant challenge. One muggy afternoon, Bill was supervising repairs to his Sherman's thrown track when a jeep pulled up beside the tank. A silver-haired colonel stepped out, his uniform crisp despite the heat. "Lieutenant Harrington?" Bill straightened and saluted. "Yes, sir." "Colonel Arthur Thompson, Armored Warfare Assessment Team. Got a minute?" "Of course, sir." Bill wiped his hands on a rag and led the colonel to the shade of a nearby apple tree. Thompson carried a leather document case, which he opened to reveal a familiar report. Bill recognized his own handwriting. "Your report on the engagement at Saint-Germain-des-Prés made for interesting reading, Lieutenant, particularly your assessment of the 75mm gun's performance against Panther armor." Bill tensed. The last thing he needed was another lecture about following doctrine. "Sir, I stand by my observations. The gun simply isn't powerful enough." To his surprise, Thompson nodded. "I know, I've been saying the same thing since we first encountered Tigers in Tunisia." Bill studied the older officer with new interest. "You were in North Africa, sir?" "With Patton. Before that, I was with the Tank Corps in the Great War, like your father." "You know my father?" Thompson smiled slightly. "Not personally, but I know his work. The cooling system modifications for the R975 engine are his design, aren't they? Reduce thermal stress on the powertrain by 15%. Bill nodded, impressed. "Yes, sir, that's his work." "Good man, good engineer." Thompson gestured to the report. "And he raised a son who knows tanks. Your technical assessment mirrors what we're hearing from across the front. The 75mm is inadequate against German heavy armor." Hope sparked in Bill's chest, finally someone who understood the problem. "What's being done about it, sir?" Thompson glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "There are several projects in development. The British 17-pounder is being fitted to some Shermans. We're calling them Fireflies. Excellent gun, but the recoil is hell on the Sherman's chassis." "And American solutions?" "We have the 90mm anti-aircraft gun, similar to the German 88mm, excellent ballistics, good armor penetration. The challenge is fitting it to an existing platform." "The Sherman turret is too small," Bill said immediately. "You'd need a new turret ring, new recoil system, completely redesigned ammunition storage." Thompson's eyebrows rose. "You have been studying the problem." "Yes, exactly. But there's another option. The M10 tank destroyer. Bigger turret, open-top design that could accommodate the 90mm with modifications." "The tank destroyer battalions have been taking heavy losses too," Bill noted. "Their doctrine of shoot and scoot isn't working well in the hedgerow country." "Precisely why we're considering the upgrade. The M10 with a 90mm gun would have the firepower to take on Panthers and Tigers frontally." Thompson tapped the document case. "That's why I'm here. We're assembling a development team. Engineers, combat veterans, gunnery experts. Your name came up." Bill blinked in surprise. "Me, sir? I'm just a platoon leader." "A platoon leader with exceptional technical knowledge and combat experience against exactly the targets we're trying to defeat. Plus, you're not afraid to speak truth to power." Thompson smiled. "That report of yours wasn't popular at division. Colonel Blackwood was quite vocal about your insubordination." "I was just reporting what I saw, sir." "I know, and that's exactly what we need. Honest assessments from the front line, not theories from officers who haven't seen a German tank except in recognition manuals." Thompson closed the document case. "I've spoken with your battalion commander. You're being temporarily reassigned to my team, effective immediately." Bill's mind raced. This was an unexpected opportunity, a chance to actually fix the problem instead of just coping with it. But leaving his crew? "My men, sir, we've been together since Fort Knox. Sergeant Patterson will take command of your tank in your absence. I understand he's more than capable." Bill nodded. Patterson was ready for command, had been for some time. "When do we leave, sir?" "Now, pack your gear. We fly to England tonight, then on to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland." As Bill gathered his few possessions, he found Patterson working on the turret rotation mechanism. "Leaving us, Lieutenant?" Patterson had always been perceptive. "Temporary reassignment, some kind of development team for a new weapon system." Bill hesitated. "You'll have command of the tank while I'm gone. Take care of the men." Patterson wiped his hands on a rag. "We heard about your report. How you told the brass their precious Sherman couldn't cut it against Panthers. That got around, did it? Word travels. The men respect it. Takes guts to tell the truth when no one wants to hear it. Patterson extended his hand. Good luck, sir. Make us something that can kill those German cats before they kill more of our friends. Bill shook his hand firmly. That's exactly what I intend to do, Sergeant. Colonel Thompson was waiting by the jeep. As they drove away from the front-line position, Bill looked back at his Sherman. It had served them well within its limitations. But those limitations were costing American lives every day. Something on your mind, Lieutenant? Thompson asked. Just wondering why it's taken so long to address the problem, sir. The reports from North Africa showed the 75mm was outmatched 2 years ago. Thompson sighed. Politics, manufacturing capacity, institutional resistance to change. The Army Ground Forces doctrine dictated that tanks aren't supposed to fight other tanks. That's what tank destroyers are for. Tell that to the Germans, sir. Their tanks seem happy to engage anything that moves. Thompson chuckled. Indeed, the battlefield has a way of rendering doctrines obsolete, but changing direction in a military bureaucracy is like turning a battleship with a rowboat. It takes time and persistence. They drove in silence for a while, passing columns of troops and supply vehicles moving toward the front. Can I ask a personal question, sir? Bill finally said. Go ahead. Why are you so invested in this? Most colonels I've met are focused on their next promotion, not fighting the system. Thompson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. I had a son, David, tank commander with the 1st Armored Division in Tunisia. His Sherman was hit by a Tiger at Kasserine Pass. Bill felt a cold weight in his stomach. I'm sorry, sir. The 75mm shells just bounced off the Tiger's armor. They never had a chance. Thompson's hands tightened on the steering wheel. After I got the news, I requested transfer from my staff position to the frontline assessment team. Made it my mission to ensure no more sons die because their equipment isn't up to the job. They drove on in silence, the weight of Thompson's words hanging between them. Bill understood now. This wasn't just about military effectiveness. It was personal. For Thompson, for Bill, and for every tank crew facing German armor with inadequate weapons. As they reached the airfield where a C-47 waited to take them to England, Thompson turned to Bill. We're going to face resistance. Bureaucratic inertia, competing priorities, officers protecting their careers and pet projects. It won't be easy. Bill nodded. Nothing worthwhile ever is, sir. No, it isn't. Thompson's eyes held a determined glint. But we're going to give our boys a fighting chance, whatever it takes. The C-47's engines roared to life as they boarded. Bill took one last look at the Normandy countryside, where men were fighting and dying in inadequate tanks. He made a silent promise to Patterson and all the others still in combat. He would bring them a weapon worthy of their courage. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, August 1944. Summer heat shimmered off the concrete test range as Bill Harrington squinted through binoculars at the distant target. A mock-up of a German Panther tank, constructed from salvaged armor plate and wood, stood 600 yards downrange. Its dark silhouette was an all-too-familiar sight, one that had haunted his dreams since Normandy. Behind him, mounted on a modified M10 chassis, the experimental 90mm gun waited for its next test firing. The weapon represented America's answer to the deadly German 88 and the hope of thousands of tank crews facing superior German armor. Adjustment complete, Lieutenant, called the master gunner, stepping back from the breach. Sweat gleamed on his face despite the early hour. Ready when you are. Bill lowered his binoculars and nodded to Colonel Thompson, who stood beside him with a clipboard. The older man's eyes reflected the same intensity Bill felt. This wasn't just another weapons test. It was personal for both of them. Firing sequence 3, sir? Proceed. Thompson checked his stopwatch. Let's see if those recoil modifications make any difference. Bill climbed up to the open turret, the metal already hot to the touch. The 90mm gun dominated the fighting compartment, its barrel nearly twice as thick as the 3-inch gun it replaced. The breech mechanism was a marvel of engineering, designed to handle pressures that would have destroyed a lesser weapon. Firing sequence 3, Bill announced. 3 rounds, standard AP as rapidly as possible. Target is Panther frontal armor at 600 yards. The gunner, Sergeant Mills, a veteran artillery instructor with 20 years of service, nodded as he settled behind the sight. His hands, calloused and steady, made minute adjustments to the elevation wheel. Ready on your command, sir. Bill positioned himself behind Mills. where he could observe both the gunner's actions and the target through the commander's sight. His mind flashed back momentarily to France, to the screams of his men as their shells bounced harmlessly off a Panther's glacis plate. "Commence firing!" The 90mm roared, its muzzle blast kicking up dust from the concrete pad. The recoil rocked the vehicle despite its 29-ton weight. The shells screamed downrange, striking the Panther mock-up dead center on the glacis plate. Even from 600 yards, they could see the impact, the armor plate buckling inward with a flash of sparks and flying metal. "Penetration," called the range officer through the field telephone. "Clean through the frontal armor. Simulated ammunition and fuel cells would be compromised." Before the dust settled, the loader slammed another shell into the breach with practiced efficiency. "Ready. Fire," Bill commanded. The gun thundered again. Another hit, another penetration. The Panther's turret face crumpled under the impact. "Loader ready. Fire." A third shot, a third hit. 3 shells, 3 penetrations in less than 20 seconds. In a real battle, that would mean a dead Panther and a live American crew. Bill couldn't suppress a grin as he climbed down from the turret to join Thompson. The older colonel was actually smiling, an expression Bill had rarely seen on his face. "That's more like it, sir. The modified recoil mechanism is working. Gun returns to battery position much faster, allowing for rapid follow-up shots. Rate of fire is nearly doubled." Thompson made notes on his clipboard, nodding with satisfaction. "Impressive. 3 penetrations of simulated Panther frontal armor at 600 yards. The 75mm couldn't do that at point-blank range." Bill ran his hand along the hot barrel of the 90mm, feeling a connection to the men who would soon depend on it for their lives. "This gun gives us parity with the German 88, maybe even an edge with our superior fire control system." Project Thunderbolt was showing tremendous promise. The 90mm gun had originally been designed as an anti-aircraft weapon, but its high muzzle velocity and heavy projectile made it ideal for tank killing. The challenge had been adapting it to a mobile platform without sacrificing accuracy or rate of fire. "How's the turret holding up?" Thompson asked as they walked around the vehicle, inspecting for stress damage. The morning sun glinted off the welded armor plates. "Better than expected. The reinforced ring distributes the recoil force more evenly. Still some issues with the traverse mechanism after prolonged firing, but nothing the mechanics can't solve." Thompson checked his watch. "Good. We have a briefing with General Harrison at 1400. These test results should help our case considerably." His expression darkened. "We'll need every advantage we can get." Bill's expression hardened. "Politics again?" "Always. The tank destroyer command that isn't happy with what we're doing here. They see it as an indictment of their existing doctrine and equipment." Thompson's voice lowered. "And there are those who believe the current 76mm upgrade for the Sherman is sufficient." "Sufficient for what? Getting more men killed?" Bill's voice had an edge to it that surprised even him. "Sir, I've seen what happens when a 76mm shell hits a Panther's frontal armor. It makes a nice spark and bounces off." Thompson nodded grimly. "I know, son. That's why we're here." As they walked back toward the administration building, a jeep raced toward them, dust billowing behind it. The driver, a young corporal, skidded to a halt nearby, the tires spraying gravel. "Colonel Thompson, sir. Message from the director's office. The briefing has been moved up. General Harrison and the board are waiting now." Thompson checked his watch again, frowning. "That's 2 hours early. Someone's playing games." He turned to Bill. "Grab the test data and meet me there. I need 5 minutes to freshen up." As the colonel hurried away, Bill felt a familiar tension rising in his gut, the same feeling he'd had before combat. This wasn't a battlefield with bullets and shells, but the stakes felt just as high. Bill hurried to the testing office, collecting the firing data, penetration analysis, and mechanical stress reports. This was the culmination of 6 weeks of intensive work. Since arriving at Aberdeen, he had thrown himself into the project with single-minded determination. 14-hour days, 7 days a week, testing different gun mountings, turret configurations, ammunition types, and fire control systems. The project had attracted a talented team: ballistics experts, mechanical engineers, metallurgists, and combat veterans like Bill, who understood the practical requirements of tank warfare. Among them was Mary Davis, one of the few female engineers at Aberdeen, a brilliant MIT graduate who specialized in recoil management systems. As Bill gathered the last of the reports, Mary entered the office, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, safety glasses pushed up on her forehead. At 28, she was older than many of the engineers, with a quiet confidence that commanded respect even in the male-dominated facility. "I heard the briefing was moved up," she said, helping Bill organize the data. Her movements were quick and precise. "That's not a good sign." Thompson thinks someone's playing politics. Mary nodded grimly. "The Tank Destroyer Command isn't happy about this project. They see it as a threat to their doctrine, and there's pressure to focus resources on the 76mm upgrade for the Sherman instead. The 76mm is better than the 75mm, but it still can't reliably penetrate Panther frontal armor beyond 300 yards. We have the data to prove it." Data doesn't always win arguments when careers and reputations are at stake. Mary handed him the final folder, her fingertips brushing his momentarily. "Be careful in there, Bill. Some of these generals haven't seen combat since 1918. They don't like being told their doctrines are outdated by a lieutenant fresh from the front." Bill tucked the folders under his arm. "Then I'll let the test results speak for themselves." The briefing room was in the main administration building, a utilitarian space with a large table surrounded by stern-faced officers. General Harrison, head of the Armored Fighting Vehicle Development Board, sat at the center, flanked by colonels and majors from various branches. Colonel Robert Blackwood, to Bill's surprise, sat among them. Their eyes met briefly, Blackwood's expression unreadable but somehow smug. Colonel Thompson was already presenting when Bill entered, laying out the strategic situation in Europe with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Gentlemen, the reality on the ground is clear. Our tank crews are facing German Panthers and Tigers with increasing frequency. The casualty rates speak for themselves." Thompson's voice carried the weight of command as he gestured to Bill. "Lieutenant Harrington has the latest test results for the 90mm gun adaptation, which addresses this critical capability gap." Bill moved forward, distributing data folders to each officer with parade ground precision. "Sir, the 90mm M3 gun, when mounted on the modified M10 chassis, demonstrates superior armor penetration compared to both the 75mm and 76mm guns currently fielded." He proceeded to walk them through the test data, keeping his presentation factual and concise. The penetration figures were compelling. The 90mm could defeat Panther frontal armor at ranges up to 1,000 yards, and Tiger armor at 800 yards. The modified recoil system allowed for rapid follow-up shots, and the new ammunition storage configuration increased combat load without compromising safety. As he concluded, General Harrison removed his reading glasses, his expression thoughtful. A career officer with silver hair and battle scars from the First World War, Harrison had a reputation for fairness and pragmatism. "Impressive results, Lieutenant, but Colonel Blackwood has raised some concerns about the project's impact on existing production lines." "Colonel?" Blackwood stood, his tall frame imposing. His uniform was immaculate, with rows of ribbons that spoke of a long career behind a desk rather than in combat. "Thank you, General. While I don't dispute the technical merits of the 90mm gun, I must question the wisdom of diverting scarce manufacturing resources to what is essentially a niche weapons system." He turned to face the room, his voice resonant with authority. "The current M10 with the 3-inch gun has proven effective when properly employed according to established doctrine. Tank destroyers are not meant to engage enemy armor head-on. They are ambush weapons designed to hit and withdraw." Bill felt his jaw tighten but maintained his professional demeanor. This was the same doctrinal argument that was getting men killed in France. Blackwood continued, "Furthermore, the 76mm upgrade program for the Sherman is already in production. It provides improved anti-tank capability without requiring entirely new turrets, fire control systems, and ammunition supply chains. It is, frankly, a more efficient use of our limited resources." General Harrison nodded. "A fair point. Lieutenant Harrington, your response?" Bill took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. This wasn't the hedgerows of Normandy, but it was still a battlefield of sorts. "Sir, with respect to Colonel Blackwood, the doctrine of tank destroyers avoiding direct engagement with enemy armor sounds reasonable in theory, but fails in practice, especially in the confined terrain of the Normandy bocage." He pulled out a map of the Norman countryside. "The hedgerows create natural choke points. German armor knows this and positions accordingly. Our tank destroyers often have no choice but to engage frontally. When they do, the 3-inch gun is inadequate against Panthers and Tigers." Bill turned to the penetration data, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke from direct experience. The 76mm Sherman is an improvement, but our tests confirm what frontline reports already indicate. It still struggles against Panther frontal armor beyond medium ranges. The 90mm, however, gives us parity with German guns. It changes the equation fundamentally. The room was silent as officers studied the data. Finally, a brigadier general from Ardennes spoke up. What about production timelines? How quickly could we field this weapon if approved? Thompson answered, we can begin converting existing M10s within 60 days. Initial deployment of the 1st Battalion by November, with full production ramping up by January 1945. And the cost? Asked another officer. Approximately 30% higher than the standard M10, primarily due to the new turret and fire control system, Thompson replied, but significantly less than developing an entirely new tank. General Harrison studied the production figures thoughtfully. Colonel Blackwood raises valid concerns about resource allocation. We can't produce everything we might want. Choices must be made. Bill felt the momentum shifting away from their project. He took a calculated risk. Sir, if I may make one final point, this isn't just about technical specifications or production efficiencies. It's about the men in those tanks. He pulled out a folder of casualty reports, his voice steady but charged with conviction. In the past month, tank destroyer battalions have suffered 30% casualties when engaging German heavy armor. That's hundreds of American lives. How do we measure that cost against production dollars? The room fell silent again. Harrison's expression softened slightly. Point taken, Lieutenant. You speak with the moral authority of frontline experience, which none of us should dismiss lightly. He gathered the reports, tapping them into a neat stack. Gentlemen, I'll review all the data presented today. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for a final decision. Thank you for your presentations. As the officers filed out, Blackwood approached Bill. That was quite a performance, Lieutenant, appealing to emotion rather than strategic thinking. Those emotions are real men dying in inadequate vehicles, sir, men under my command. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. War has always involved casualties, Harrington. No weapon system will change that fundamental reality. What matters is the strategic application of resources to achieve victory at the lowest overall cost. And I believe the 90mm tank destroyer does exactly that, sir. We'll see what the general decides. Blackwood turned to leave, then paused. By the way, your former platoon was in heavy fighting near St. Lo last week. Sergeant Patterson performed admirably, I'm told. Destroyed 2 Panzer IVs, used proper combined arms tactics, calling in artillery and air support rather than engaging a Panther directly. Perhaps there's a lesson there. The implied criticism was clear. Blackwood was suggesting that proper tactics, not better guns, were the answer. Bill swallowed his retort, knowing that arguing further would only harden the colonel's opposition. Thompson joined Bill as Blackwood departed. That could have gone worse. Harrison is fair-minded. He'll consider the data objectively. Blackwood seems to have a personal vendetta against this project, and against me. Thompson sighed. Blackwood represents the old school of thought, doctrine over adaptation, the Army way over battlefield improvisation. Men like him built their careers on the existing system. Change threatens that foundation. So it's not about the best weapon for the job. It's about protecting reputations and careers. Welcome to the Pentagon's war, Lieutenant. Different battlefield, same human nature. Thompson clapped him on the shoulder. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be decisive one way or another. As they left the building, Mary was waiting by a staff car. How did it go? Bill shrugged. Hard to say. The data is compelling, but there's resistance. Blackwood is pushing hard for the 76mm Sherman program instead. Mary frowned. Politics as usual. I've been running additional calculations on turret stress that might help our case. Want to review them over dinner? The mess closes in 20 minutes. I should prepare for tomorrow's follow-up questions. Bill hedged, suddenly aware of Thompson watching them with interest. You can do both, Thompson suggested with the ghost of a smile. Technical discussions over mess hall cuisine, the height of Aberdeen social life. Mary drove them to the officers' mess, where they claimed a quiet corner table with their trays of indifferent food. While they ate, she walked Bill through her latest findings on turret ring stress distribution and recoil management. Her technical knowledge was impressive, her explanations clear and precise. This data conclusively shows the modified turret can handle sustained firing without structural fatigue, she concluded, closing her notebook. Should help counter any remaining technical objections. Bill nodded, impressed as always by her thoroughness. This is excellent work, Mary. You've addressed one of Harrison's key concerns. She smiled slightly, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Just doing my job. This project matters. I've read the combat reports. I know what's happening to our tank crews in Europe. Most civilians don't understand the technical details or why they matter. I'm not most civilians. My brother was at Kasserine Pass. Her expression darkened momentarily. His tank was hit by a tiger. He survived, but lost both legs. So yes, I understand exactly why this matters. Bill studied her with new appreciation. I didn't know. I'm sorry. Don't be. David's doing well now, teaching mathematics at a community college in Ohio. She gathered her notes, her professional demeanor returning. I just want to make sure other brothers come home intact. The personal connection explained her dedication to the project, the long hours and meticulous attention to detail. Like Thompson, she had skin in the game. This wasn't just an engineering challenge, it was a mission. We'll make it happen, Bill promised, one way or another. The next morning, they reassembled in the briefing room. The tension was palpable as they waited for General Harrison. He entered promptly at 0800, his face giving no indication of his decision. The room fell silent as he took his seat. Gentlemen, I've reviewed all the data and arguments presented yesterday. This is not an easy decision. Both programs have merit, and in an ideal world, we would pursue both aggressively. He paused, looking around the room. However, resources are finite, and the war doesn't wait for ideal circumstances. Bill felt tension knotting his shoulders as Harrison continued. The 76mm Sherman program will continue as planned. It represents an incremental improvement that can be rapidly fielded with minimal disruption to production lines. Blackwood smiled slightly, clearly taking this as a victory, but Harrison wasn't finished. However, the 90mm gun project has demonstrated sufficient promise to warrant continued development. Colonel Thompson, you are authorized to proceed with a limited production run of 200 vehicles, designated as the 90mm gun motor carriage M36. The room erupted in murmurs. Thompson nodded, his expression carefully neutral, but Bill could see the satisfaction in his eyes. It wasn't everything they'd asked for, but it was enough to get the weapon into the field. Harrison raised his hand for silence. This decision balances immediate needs with longer-term requirements. The 76mm Sherman addresses our current production capacity, while the M36 development prepares us for the increasing threat of German heavy armor. As the meeting adjourned, Thompson shook hands with several officers, including a reluctant Blackwood. Bill hung back, watching the political niceties play out. This was a different kind of victory than he was accustomed to, measured not in ground taken, but in production numbers and deployment timelines. Lieutenant Harrington, General Harrison approached, extending his hand. Your first-hand combat experience was valuable in this assessment. Few staff officers have faced a Panther across a Norman hedgerow. Bill shook his hand. Thank you, sir. The men at the front will be grateful for the M36. I'm assigning you to the deployment team. You'll oversee crew training and initial field operations. Harrison's expression was serious. This is a limited opportunity to prove the concept. Make it count. Yes, sir. We won't let you down. As Harrison departed, Thompson joined Bill, his expression satisfied. 200 vehicles. Not the 1,000 I wanted, but enough to make a difference. If we can get them to the right units at the right time, that's our next challenge. Production begins next week. I want you to oversee the training program. We need crews who can maximize the weapon's potential. Chapter 6. The Backroom Battle. September 1944. The production line at the Fisher Tank Arsenal in Grand Blanc, Michigan, hummed with activity. The first M36 hulls moved slowly along the assembly line, and teams of workers swarming over each one, installing engines, drivetrains, electrical systems, and armor plate. In a separate building, the new turrets took shape, dominated by the massive 90mm M3 gun. Bill Harrington stood on the observation platform with Mary Davis and Colonel Thompson, watching the production process with satisfaction. After weeks of preparation, the project was taking physical form. First 10 units will be completed by the end of the week, the production manager reported, pride evident in his voice. We're ahead of schedule on hull conversion, but the turrets are more complex than anticipated. We've had to retrain welders for the new specifications. Thompson nodded. Keep up the good work. These vehicles are urgently needed in Europe. As they toured the facility, Bill was impressed by the scale and efficiency of American industrial might. The converted M10 hulls arrived from the field or other production facilities, were stripped down to their frames, then rebuilt with upgraded components to handle the increased weight and recoil of the 90mm gun. "It's incredible," he commented to Mary as they watched a completed hullmate with its new turret, the massive crane lowering the turret assembly with surprising precision. "From blueprint to battle-ready in weeks instead of years." "That's the American way," she replied, her eyes tracking the assembly process with professional assessment. "Once we commit to something, we move heaven and earth to make it happen." Their tour complete, they joined Thompson for a meeting with the production team. The news was mostly positive. Production was on schedule. Early quality control tests showed the vehicles performing to specifications, and the first batch would be ready for crew training within days. As they left the factory, Thompson received a message from the headquarters. His expression darkened as he read it. "Problem, sir?" Bill asked. "Potentially. General Harrison wants us back in Washington immediately. Apparently there are new concerns about the project." "What kind of concerns?" "We're on schedule, under budget, and the performance tests exceed specifications. The message doesn't say, but I suspect our friend Colonel Blackwood is involved." Thompson folded the message into his pocket. "We'll fly out this afternoon. Be prepared for another political battle." The flight to Washington was tense. Thompson spent most of it reviewing production reports and performance data, preparing for whatever challenge awaited them. Bill did the same, assembling all the positive feedback from the initial training sessions with experienced tank destroyer crews. Mary, who had been included in the summons, worked on her own presentation about the technical reliability of the M36. "Whatever objections they raise, we'll have answers," she said with determination. They arrived at Pentagon late that evening and were immediately ushered into a conference room where General Harrison waited with several staff officers. Blackwood was among them, his expression smugly confident. "Colonel Thompson, thank you for coming on such short notice," Harrison began. "We have a situation that requires immediate attention." "Happy to help, General. What's the situation?" Harrison gestured to Blackwood. "Colonel, please brief the team." Blackwood stood, distributing folders to everyone at the table. "New intelligence from the European theater indicates a significant change in German armor deployment. The Reich is shifting production priority from Panthers and Tigers to more numerous Panzer IVs and assault guns. This changes the threat assessment that justified the M36 program." Bill opened the folder, scanning the intelligence summary. The data showed a decrease in Panther production over the past 2 months, with a corresponding increase in lighter armored vehicles. But something about the numbers didn't add up. "Furthermore," Blackwood continued, "field reports indicate that the 76mm gun on the upgraded Sherman is performing adequately against the most commonly encountered German armor. Combined with improved ammunition and proper tactics, it meets our current needs without the additional expense and production disruption of the M36 program." Thompson studied the reports with a frown. "These numbers conflict with intelligence I received last week. Our reports show continued production of Panthers, particularly the OSFG model with improved frontal armor." "My information comes directly from SHAEF Intelligence," Blackwood countered, "the most current assessment available." Harrison looked troubled. "If the threat profile has indeed changed, we need to reconsider resource allocation. The M36 was approved specifically to counter heavy German armor. If that threat is diminishing, the justification weakens." Bill couldn't remain silent. "Sir, with respect, these production numbers don't align with what we're seeing on the battlefield. In the past month, Panthers and Tigers have been involved in every major engagement along the front. Remnants of earlier deployments," Blackwood dismissed with a wave of his hand. "The strategic picture is changing. The Germans are prioritizing quantity over quality as their resources dwindle." Mary raised her hand tentatively. "General, may I ask where this intelligence originated, the specific source?" Blackwood stiffened. "That's classified, Miss Davis. Suffice it to say it comes from reliable sources within German-occupied territory." Something in his tone made Bill suspicious. He glanced at Thompson, who gave a slight nod, obviously sharing his doubts. "General," Thompson said carefully, "before making any decisions based on this intelligence, I would strongly recommend cross-verification with other sources. Intelligence from occupied territories can be compromised or manipulated." Harrison considered this. "A fair point, but we can't ignore potential changes in the threat profile. I want a comprehensive review of all available intelligence on German armor production and deployment. Until then, the M36 program will continue, but I'm putting a hold on expanding beyond the initial 200 units." After the meeting adjourned, Thompson pulled Bill and Mary aside in a quiet corridor. Something's not right. Those numbers don't match anything I've seen from reliable sources. Blackwood is pushing an agenda, Bill agreed. But why? What does he gain by undermining the M36? Follow the money, Mary suggested. Who benefits if the M36 is canceled in favor of more 76mm Shermans? Thompson's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Blackwood has connections to Detroit Arsenal, old friendships with executives who hold contracts for Sherman components. Could he be that corrupt? Bill asked, putting personal connections above the needs of the men in combat? Not corruption in the traditional sense. More likely, he genuinely believes in the doctrine he spent his career developing. The fact that it aligns with his friend's financial interests just makes it easier to justify. Thompson checked his watch. We need more information. Bill, contact your old unit. Get first-hand reports of what they're facing now, not filtered through headquarters. I'll wire Patterson today. Mary, work your contacts in technical intelligence. See if you can trace the source of these production numbers. What about you, Colonel? She asked. I'm going to call in some favors with British intelligence. They have sources inside Germany that might give us a clearer picture. Thompson's expression was grim. Make no mistake, this is a fight for the survival of the program and for the lives of the men who will face German armor without adequate weapons if we fail. Over the next week, they gathered information from every available source. Bill received a detailed letter from Patterson, now a lieutenant commanding his old tank platoon. The reality on the ground was clear. Panthers and Tigers remained a significant threat, involved in nearly every major engagement. Far from decreasing, encounters with German heavy armor had increased as the Allies pushed toward Germany. Mary's technical contacts provided production analyses based on aerial reconnaissance of German factories. These showed continued priority production of Panthers, particularly at the Mayenne plant in Nuremberg. The numbers directly contradicted Blackwood's intelligence. Thompson's British connections proved most valuable. Through a former colleague now working with MI6, he obtained transcripts of intercepted German communications about tank production priorities. These ultra-decrypts, among the most closely guarded secrets of the war, conclusively showed that Panther production remained a top priority for the German High Command. Armed with this evidence, they requested another meeting with General Harrison. This time, they made sure Blackwood wasn't the only colonel in the room. Thompson invited representatives from field artillery, combat engineering, and the British liaison office. Harrison listened carefully as they presented their evidence, piece by piece. The field reports, the technical analyses, and finally, with appropriate security precautions, the intelligence from British sources. This is compelling evidence, Colonel Thompson, Harrison admitted. It directly contradicts Colonel Blackwood's assessment. Blackwood, his face flushed with anger, tried to dismiss their findings. These are isolated data points. The strategic overview still suggests a shift toward lighter armor. With respect, Colonel, the British liaison officer interjected, our intelligence indicates quite the opposite. The Germans are doubling down on qualitative superiority as their quantitative advantage diminishes. The Panther remains their primary battle tank, with increasing numbers of the improved AUSFG model entering service. Harrison turned to Blackwood. Colonel, I need to understand how your intelligence differs so dramatically from these other sources. Who provided your information? Blackwood hesitated. A confidential source within the French resistance, reporting on train movements from German factories. I'd like to see the raw intelligence, not just your summary, Harrison pressed. I don't have access to the raw reports. They were summarized for me by a contact in Schaeff Intelligence. Thompson seized the opening. General, it appears Colonel Blackwood has been working with incomplete or possibly manipulated information. I suggest we rely on the more comprehensive intelligence provided by multiple sources. Harrison nodded slowly. I agree. Based on the evidence presented today, the threat from German heavy armor remains significant. The M36 program will continue as planned, and I'm authorizing an additional 300 units beyond the initial production run. Blackwood stood abruptly. General, this is a mistake. We're diverting critical resources from proven platforms to chase a marginal advantage against a diminishing threat. The decision is made, Colonel. The evidence is clear. Harrison's tone brooked no further argument. The M36 will be deployed to Europe as quickly as production allows. As Blackwood stormed out of the room, Bill felt a mixture of relief and triumph. They had won this round, preserving the program that would give American tankers a fighting chance against German armor. Outside the conference room, Thompson accepted congratulations from several officers before joining Bill and Mary. Well done, both of you. Your thoroughness made the difference today. What happens now? Mary asked. Will Blackwood give up? Thompson shook his head. Men like Blackwood don't give up. They just change tactics. He'll be watching for any failure, any weakness in the M36 program. We need to ensure the initial deployment is flawless. The first production vehicles are already at Aberdeen, Bill said. Training begins next week with crews selected from veteran tank destroyer battalions. Good. I want you to personally oversee their training, Lieutenant. These first crews will determine the M36's reputation in combat. They need to be the best we have. Bill nodded, already mentally reviewing the training program they had developed. I'll make sure they are, sir. Chapter 7. The Shootout. October 1944. Aberdeen Proving Ground vibrated with the thunder of heavy guns as the first M36 training class conducted live fire exercises. 10 vehicles, fresh from the production line, moved across the range in formation, their 90mm guns tracking target silhouettes representing German tanks. Bill Harrington stood on an observation platform with Colonel Thompson and a group of senior officers, including General Harrison. This demonstration would determine whether the accelerated training program was producing combat-ready crews. Target acquisition exercise beginning now, announced the range controller through a loudspeaker. Multiple targets, varying ranges, pop-up sequence. The exercise simulated a fluid battlefield situation. Target silhouettes of Panthers, Tigers, and Panzer IVs appeared randomly across the range at distances from 400 to 1,200 yards. The M36 crews had to identify, prioritize, and engage the threats in real time. Impressive response times, noted General Harrison as the first targets were hit within seconds of appearing. Your crews seem well prepared, Lieutenant. Bill nodded, professional pride evident in his bearing. 4 weeks of intensive training, sir. These men were already experienced tank destroyer crews. We focused on the specific capabilities of the 90mm gun and the tactical doctrine to maximize its effectiveness. The exercise continued, with the M36s demonstrating their firepower against the hardest targets at the longest ranges. The 90mm gun proved devastatingly accurate, its shells penetrating the armored target plates that represented Panther frontal armor. Notice how they're using hull-down positions, Bill pointed out as the tanks maneuvered between firing, exposing only the turret while maintaining clear fields of fire. Standard German tactic, but now we can use it against them with a gun that can match theirs. Harrison nodded approvingly. Combined with the M36's mobility, that gives them a significant tactical advantage. They can strike, relocate, and strike again before the enemy can effectively respond. The final phase of the exercise involved a simulated counterattack. Towed targets representing advancing Panthers moved toward the M36 positions, while artillery simulators created battlefield chaos. Despite the challenging conditions, the tank destroyer crews maintained their discipline, engaging and destroying all targets. As the exercise concluded, the observing officers broke into spontaneous applause. Even the most skeptical among them could not deny the effectiveness of the weapon system and the proficiency of the crews. Outstanding demonstration, Lieutenant, Harrison congratulated him. These crews are ready for combat deployment. Thank you, sir. They've worked incredibly hard to master the system in such a limited time. When will the first units ship out? Asked another general. Thompson answered, the 1st Battalion of 36 vehicles leaves for the European theater next week. They'll be operational by early November. Harrison turned to his aide. Make sure Schaeff knows these units are coming. I want them deployed where they can make the most difference, not held in reserve. As the observation group dispersed, Thompson remained with Bill. You've done exceptional work with these crews, Lieutenant. General Eisenhower's headquarters has specifically requested the M36s be assigned to the 1st Army, which is facing the heaviest German armor concentration. That's where they're needed most, Bill agreed, though part of me wishes I was going with them. Your work here is more valuable. Training these crews properly will save more lives than you could as a single tank commander. Thompson paused. However, once the initial training program is firmly established, I am considering sending you to Europe as a technical liaison. Someone who understands both the weapon system and the tactical situation is needed to ensure proper deployment. Bill felt a surge of mixed emotions. Returning to the front had been his goal since arriving at Aberdeen, but the prospect now brought unexpected complications. When would that be, sir? December, perhaps, after the 3rd training class completes. By then, Mary can handle the technical training aspects without you. Mary, the unspoken complication. Over the past 2 months, they had worked side by side, developing the training program, solving technical problems, celebrating small victories, and overcoming setbacks. Their professional relationship had deepened into something more, though neither had acknowledged it openly. "I'll go wherever I'm needed most, sir." Thompson nodded, understanding the conflict in the younger man's voice. "We'll discuss it further when the time comes. For now, let's focus on getting these first units shipped out." The next day, Bill found Mary in the technical training facility, supervising adjustments to a 90mm gun mount. Her hair was tied back in its usual practical style, a smudge of grease on her cheek evidence of her hands-on approach. The demonstration was a complete success, he told her. Harrison was impressed. "The 1st Battalion ships out next week." Mary smiled, genuine pleasure lighting her eyes. "That's wonderful news. All that work is finally paying off." The crew specifically mentioned the technical training as invaluable. "Your simplified maintenance procedures have reduced service time by nearly 40%. Just applying basic efficiency principles, nothing revolutionary." The maintenance sergeants disagree. They're calling it the Davis method. She laughed, wiping her hands on a rag. "Famous at last. My mother will be so proud." Bill hesitated, then shared the rest of his news. "Thompson mentioned I might be sent to Europe as a technical liaison in December." Her hands stilled. "Oh, that's sooner than expected." "Nothing definite yet, just under consideration." Mary nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "It makes sense. You know the vehicle and the combat conditions. You'd be the perfect liaison." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken thoughts and emotions. The reality of war had always been present in their work, but suddenly it felt more immediate, more personal. "Would you like to have dinner tonight?" Bill asked suddenly, "to celebrate the successful demonstration? There's a new restaurant in town that supposedly has real coffee." Her expression softened. "I'd like that very much." That evening, away from the base and the constant pressure of the project, they allowed themselves to relax. The restaurant was small but elegant, with tablecloths and candles providing a civilized atmosphere rarely found near military installations. "To the M36, Bill proposed, raising his glass. Real wine was available, a rare luxury in wartime America. May it serve its crews well." "To the men who will operate it," Mary countered, "may it bring them all home safely." They talked about this project, the challenges they had overcome, the satisfaction of seeing their work materialize into combat-ready vehicles. But gradually the conversation shifted to more personal topics. "What will you do after the war?" Bill asked. "Return to civilian engineering?" Mary considered the question. "I've been thinking about that. This experience has shown me how fulfilling it is to work on projects that make a real difference. I might stay with the government if there are meaningful roles for women engineers in peacetime. There should be. You're as qualified as any male engineer I've met, more so than most." "Thank you, but the reality is different. Before the war, I couldn't even get an interview with most firms. It took a national emergency for them to overlook my gender." She sipped her wine. "What about you? Career Army like your father?" Bill shook his head. "My father was never career military. He served in one war, came home, and never looked back. I always assumed I'd do the same. Return to Detroit, perhaps work in the automotive industry. But now I'm not sure. The Army has become familiar. I understand its rhythms, its structure, and there's something meaningful about serving a purpose larger than yourself." Mary studied him across the table, candlelight reflecting in her dark eyes. "You're good at it. Leadership suits you. The men respect you because you understand both the technical aspects and the human elements. I've had good teachers. Thompson, my father in his way." He paused. "You." "Me, what have I taught you?" "That expertise doesn't have to come with arrogance. That you can be brilliant without making others feel inferior. That passion for your work is the greatest qualification of all." Bill found himself speaking more openly than he had intended, the wine perhaps loosening his usual reserve. Mary's expression softened, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "I think that's the nicest compliment I've ever received." The rest of the evening passed in comfortable conversation, touching on childhoods, families, hopes for the post-war world. As they prepared to leave, Bill realized with surprise that for a few hours, he had not thought about the war, about Panthers and Tigers, about the men facing them in inadequate tanks. For a few hours, he had simply been a man enjoying the company of a remarkable woman. Outside the restaurant, the October night was clear and cool, stars visible above the dimmed wartime streetlights. They walked slowly toward the car, neither eager for the evening to end. "Thank you for dinner," Mary said. "It was a lovely celebration. Thank you for your company. It's been—" Bill searched for the right word. "Refreshing." She smiled up at him, her face beautiful in the soft light. "Refreshing? Is that the best a tank commander can do?" "Tanks aren't known for their poetry," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Wonderful, it's been wonderful." They reached the car, but instead of opening the door, Bill found himself turning to face her. "Mary, She met his gaze steadily. "Yes? When this war is over, when we've both completed our duties here, I'd like to take you to dinner again. Somewhere without rationing or blackout restrictions. Somewhere we can talk about something other than tank guns and armor penetration." "I'd like that too." Her voice was soft but certain. "Very much." In that moment, with the stars above and the world at war around them, Bill Harrington did something he hadn't planned. He leaned down and kissed Mary Davis, gently at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. When they finally broke apart, both were slightly breathless. Reality reasserted itself slowly, the sounds of distant military vehicles and the glow of searchlights reminding them of the world beyond this moment. "We should get back," Mary said reluctantly. "Early training session tomorrow." Bill nodded, opening the car door for her. Tomorrow. The word held promise now, a future beyond the war that neither had fully imagined before. Whatever happened in Europe, whatever challenges still faced the M36 program, they had found something unexpected and precious amid the machinery of war. As they drove back to the base, Bill's thoughts returned to the tanks, the crews, the battles to come. But now those thoughts were tempered with something new. Hope for what might follow when the guns finally fell silent. The next week passed in a blur of activity. The 1st M36 Battalion was prepared for shipment, each vehicle meticulously checked and loaded onto railway cars bound for the East Coast ports. The crews, now fully trained and confident in their new weapons, received their final briefings and deployment orders. On the day of departure, Bill stood with Thompson and Mary, watching as the men boarded their transport trucks. The M36s had already been loaded onto ships, waiting for them in New York Harbor. Lieutenant Michael Carter, commander of the 1st M36 Company, approached Bill with an extended hand. "Thank you for the training, sir. We won't let you down." Bill gripped his hand firmly. "Remember what we discussed, Lieutenant. The 90mm gives you the firepower to engage German armor frontally, but that doesn't mean you should abandon sound tactics. Use terrain, maintain mobility, coordinate with artillery and air support." Carter nodded seriously. "Understood, sir. We'll make you proud." As the trucks pulled away, Thompson laid a hand on Bill's shoulder. "They're ready. You've done everything possible to prepare them. I hope it's enough." "It's never enough in war, Lieutenant, but it's the best we can do from here." Thompson checked his watch. "We have a meeting with Harrison at 1400. The deployment schedule for the next battalion needs approval." The war continued, relentless in its demands. But for Bill Harrington, something fundamental had changed. The tanks, the guns, the technical specifications were no longer abstract problems to solve. They were lifelines for men like Carter and his crews, facing the deadly reality of combat. And beyond the war, beyond the immediacy of the M36 program, he had found a reason to look forward to peace. A reason named Mary Davis, who now walked beside him toward the administration building, already discussing modifications for the next production batch. Life and death, hope and fear, juve and war, all bound together in the thunder of a 90mm gun. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes forest, Belgium. Snow fell in thick, silent curtains, blanketing the world in white. In the command post of the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, Lieutenant Michael Carter studied the map by lantern light. His fingers traced the American lines, then moved to the German positions across the border. His eyes kept drifting to the forest line, barely visible through the small window. Something felt wrong. The Germans had been too quiet for too long. A radio operator huddled near the stove, trying to stay warm in the bitter Belgian winter. Outside, sentries stamped their feet and blew on their hands, their breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The M36 Thunderbolts sat in their defensive positions, barrels pointed east toward the enemy, like silent predators waiting for prey. "Lieutenant, radio message from headquarters." The radio man handed him a dispatch. His young face was drawn with exhaustion after weeks in the field. "All units on high alert. Reports of German movement along the front." Carter read the message, his brow furrowing. The terse wording conveyed urgency without specifics. Wake the crews. I want the M36s ready to move in 15 minutes. Outside, the night erupted in thunder. The distant rumble of artillery shattered the winter silence as the horizon lit up with flashes of light. The German offensive had begun. What would later be known as the Battle of the Bulge was underway. 2 days later, and thousands of miles away, Bill Harrington stood in Thompson's office at Aberdeen, listening to the scattered reports coming in from the front. The room was cold despite the radiator clanking in the corner. Maps were spread across the desk, marked with the last known positions of American units. The Germans have broken through the American lines, Thompson said grimly, his finger tracing the bulge that was forming in the Allied front. Panzer divisions are pouring through the gap. It's a full-scale offensive. They've committed everything they have left. The 702nd? Bill asked, thinking of Carter and the 1st M36 Battalion he had trained. Men who had become more than just students to him. Right in the middle of it, 1st Army is taking the brunt of the attack. Early reports mentioned Panthers and Tigers in significant numbers. Thompson's face was drawn with concern. As a former tank commander who had lost his son to a tiger, he understood the human cost behind the tactical reports. Bill felt a cold weight in his stomach. This was the moment of truth for the M36, the test of everything they had worked for. Those men were facing the full fury of the German armored forces with a weapon system that had never been tested in a major offensive. Any word on how they're performing? Nothing specific yet. Communications are spotty. Thompson poured coffee for them both, the steam rising in the cold office. His hands, Bill noticed, weren't quite steady. But if there was ever a time for the 90mm gun to prove itself, it's now. The door opened and Mary entered with a folder of reports. Her face was drawn with concern, her normally neat hair slightly disheveled from hours of work. Latest intelligence summary: the Germans have committed elements of 6 Panzer divisions, including the 1st SS Panzer Division with King Tigers. Bill took the folder, scanning the contents quickly. The situation was worse than they had feared. They're making a push for Antwerp, trying to split the Allied forces. He looked up at Thompson. Sir, I should be there. What do you mean, Lieutenant? The technical liaison position you mentioned. Send me now. Those crews need someone who understands the M36's capabilities, who can help coordinate their deployment against this armored thrust. His voice took on an intensity that surprised even him. We've spent months developing this weapon. I need to see it through. Thompson considered him thoughtfully. You're not scheduled to deploy until after the new year, but under the circumstances, he nodded decisively. I'll make arrangements immediately. You can leave tonight on a military transport to England, then to the continent. Mary's eyes widened, but she kept her professional composure. Only the slight tightening of her grip on her clipboard betrayed her emotions. I'll prepare the technical briefing materials in the latest field modifications. As she left to gather the documents, Thompson studied Bill. This isn't just about the M36, is it? You feel responsible for those men. I trained them, sir. Told them the 90mm gun would give them a fighting chance against German armor. I need to be there to help make that promise good. Bill met the older man's gaze steadily. We've fought too many battles here in Washington and Aberdeen to lose the war that matters. Thompson nodded. I understand. Just remember your primary mission is technical assessment and liaison, not frontline combat. The Army has invested too much in your expertise to lose you to a German shell. Yes, sir. But they both knew that once at the front, such distinctions often vanished in the chaos of battle. That evening, Bill found himself at the airfield, duffel bag packed, waiting for the transport plane. The massive C-47 sat on the tarmac, its engines being checked by ground crew. Other officers and technical specialists would be traveling with him, each called to the front by the sudden German offensive. Mary stood beside him, the cold December wind whipping at her coat. Her hair, normally so carefully arranged, blew across her face. She brushed it back with a gloved hand. I've included all the technical bulletins and the latest performance data, she said, handing him a waterproof pouch. Also, the field modification specs for the elevation mechanism. It tends to freeze in extreme cold. Thank you. He tucked the pouch into his bag, then turned to face her. The airfield lights cast long shadows across the tarmac as snow began to fall. Thick flakes caught in her hair, glistening momentarily before melting. Mary, She shook her head slightly. No goodbyes. You'll be back before you know it. Her professional demeanor slipped just slightly as she added, Just make sure you do come back. Bill nodded. I have a dinner date to keep, remember? A small smile touched her lips, I remember. The transport plane's engines roared to life, drowning out further conversation. With a final nod, Bill shouldered his bag and walked toward the waiting aircraft. As he climbed aboard, he turned for one last look. Mary stood alone on the tarmac, her figure small but straight against the vastness of the night, snow gathering on her shoulders. The journey to the front took 3 days of uncomfortable transport flights, jeep rides over icy roads, and finally a half-track journey to the headquarters of the First Army. The closer they got to the front, the more evidence Bill saw of the massive German offensive. Retreating American units, wounded soldiers being evacuated, the grim faces of commanders trying to stem the tide. The roads were clogged with military traffic moving in both directions. Reinforcements pushed forward while support units withdrew to safer positions. Artillery rumbled constantly in the distance, and occasionally the distinctive whine of German rockets would send everyone diving for cover. At First Army headquarters, a hastily established command post in a Belgian school building, Bill was directed to General Collins, commander of the 7th Corps, who was organizing a counterattack against the northern shoulder of the German salient. Lieutenant Harrington, Collins greeted him briskly, not looking up from the map table where he was conferring with his staff. I've been told you're our expert on the M36. What can you tell me about its effectiveness against the German heavies we're facing? Sir, the 90mm gun can penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at ranges up to 1,000 yards, and the side armor of a King Tiger at similar distances. The key is proper tactical deployment. Bill stepped forward, pointing to the map. Hold down positions with good fields of fire, coordinated with infantry support to protect against flanking maneuvers. Collins nodded, his weathered face showing the strain of command decisions that would cost men their lives. Good, because we've got both coming at us. The 1st SS Panzer Division is leading their advance. The 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion has been attached to the 3rd Armored Division for our counterattack. They're holding a defensive position near Houghton, about 20 miles from here. That's where you're headed. Bill was issued winter combat gear in a jeep with driver. As they navigated the snow-covered roads toward Houghton, the sounds of battle grew louder. Artillery rumbled in the distance, and fighter planes occasionally screamed overhead, their contrails crisscrossing the pale winter sky. The landscape was surreal. Peaceful Belgian villages and farmhouses stood amid fields of pristine snow, while shell craters and burned-out vehicles marked the recent passage of war. In some places, bodies still lay where they had fallen, frozen in the attitudes of their final moments, waiting for graves' registration units to collect them. They reached the 3rd Armored Division's forward command post by nightfall. The division, nicknamed Spearhead, had been rushed to block the German advance and was now preparing to counterattack. The atmosphere was tense but focused, men moving with the purposeful efficiency of veterans. Lieutenant Harrington, the division operations officer, greeted him. Your timing is excellent. We're planning a coordinated tank infantry attack tomorrow morning, with the M36s providing overwatch from hold-down positions. Lieutenant Carter's company is positioned on that ridge to the northeast. I suggest you join them for the briefing. Bill found the 702nd's command post in a small stone farmhouse. The building was partially damaged by artillery, but its thick walls provided better protection than tents in the freezing weather. Inside, Carter was conducting a briefing for his platoon leaders, a map spread out on a table lit by gasoline lanterns. He looked up as Bill entered, surprise and then relief crossing his face. Lieutenant Harrington, what are you doing here, sir? Carter had aged in the months since training, his boyish face now leaner, his eyes holding the 1,000-yard stare of combat experience. Technical liaison, thought you might need some help with the Thunderbolts. Bill used the nickname the crews had given the M36. How are they performing? Carter gestured to the map. See for yourself. We've been in action for 4 days. Confirmed kills, 11 Panthers, 7 Panzer IVs, and 1 King Tiger. Pride was evident in his voice. The 90mm is everything you promised, sir. We can engage those German cats from positions they can't effectively return fire. Bill felt a surge of satisfaction. The months of work, the political battles, the technical challenges, all justified by these results. Men were alive because of what they had accomplished. We've had some mechanical issues, Carter continued. The extreme cold is affecting the hydraulic systems, and we've had trouble with the turret traverse in these conditions. I brought the latest field modifications, Bill said, opening his pouch. Let's get your maintenance teams working on them tonight. Tomorrow sounds like a busy day. As the briefing concluded, Carter took Bill outside to see the M36s. The night was clear now, stars brilliant in the black sky, the temperature well below freezing. Their breath-formed clouds as they walked along the ridge where the tank destroyers were positioned. The M36s were positioned in carefully prepared emplacements, hulls protected by earthen berms, only the turrets exposed. The crews had draped white sheets over the vehicles for snow camouflage, making them almost invisible against the winter landscape. In the moonlight, they looked like ghostly sentinels guarding the American lines. "Impressive work," Bill commented. "You've positioned them perfectly for hull-down engagement." "Just like you taught us," Carter replied. "Maximum firepower, minimum exposure. We've been coordinating with the Sherman tanks, letting them maneuver while we provide long-range fire support." He gestured toward the valley below. "The Germans don't know we're here. Their Panthers advance thinking they outgun everything we have. Then we open up from 1,000 yards, and they never know what hit them." A soldier approached, saluting. "Lieutenant Carter, radio message from division. German armor reported moving into assembly positions 2 miles east, likely preparing for an attack at dawn." Carter nodded. "Acknowledge. Tell all crews to stand ready at first light." He turned to Bill. "Looks like you'll see the Thunderbolts in action sooner than expected, sir." That night, Bill helped the maintenance teams implement the cold weather modifications to the hydraulic systems and turret mechanisms. The men worked by flashlight under blankets to avoid showing light, their breath fogging in the frigid air. Despite the cold and danger, morale was high. The crews had confidence in their weapon, a stark contrast to the earlier frustration with inadequate equipment. As dawn approached, Bill joined Carter in the command M36. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the forest a dark line against the horizon. Inside the tank destroyer, the crew performed final checks on the gun and communication systems. The gunner, Sergeant Klein, methodically cleaned his optics, ensuring perfect visibility for the coming engagement. "Movement," Klein reported, his eye to the periscope. "Multiple vehicles, edge of the forest, range approximately 1,600 yards. Carter's raised his binoculars. "Confirmed. Panther Company, at least 5 vehicles with infantry support." He keyed his radio. "All Thunderbolt units, this is Carter. German armor approaching from the east. Hold fire until they reach the open field." Bill watched as the German tanks emerged from the tree line, their long-barreled 75mm guns sweeping the landscape. The Panthers moved with confidence, their commanders apparently unaware of the American positions. Behind the Panthers came Panzer IVs and troop carriers. "They don't see us," Carter murmured. "The camouflage is working." The German formation advanced steadily across the snow-covered field, apparently confident in their superior armor. When they reached approximately 1,000 yards, Carter gave the order. "All units, fire at will. Priority targets are Panthers." The ridge erupted as 6 M36s fired almost simultaneously. Through his binoculars, Bill saw 3 Panthers hit immediately. One exploded in a massive fireball as the 90mm shell penetrated its ammunition storage. The other slowed, smoke pouring from damaged components. The German force scattered, seeking cover. The Panthers that remained operational returned fire, their shells falling short or striking the berms protecting the M36 hulls. "Adjust fire," Carter ordered. "Focus on the undamaged Panthers." For 30 minutes, the battle raged. The M36s methodically picked off the German armor from their protected positions. Klein was a master with the 90mm, his shots unerringly finding vulnerable points in the German tanks. When a flanking group of Panzer IVs attempted to circle around the ridge, Carter directed 2 M36s to reposition and engage them. By the time the German force retreated, 13 armored vehicles lay burning on the snow-covered field. The M36s had suffered only minor damage from near misses and shrapnel. "Outstanding gunnery," Bill congratulated Carter as they surveyed the battlefield. "Your crews have mastered the weapon system." Carter nodded, his young face showing both pride and the strain of command. "The 90mm makes all the difference. Before, we had to get suicidally close to hurt a Panther. Now we can engage them beyond the effective range of their guns." He gestured to the burning German tanks. "That's our Christmas present to the SS Panzer Division." As they inspected the M36s after the engagement, Carter introduced Bill to the crews. Many remembered him from their training, and they eagerly shared their combat experiences with the new weapon. That King Tiger kill was something, sir, a sergeant told him. We hit it at 1,100 yards, right in the turret ring. One shot, and the whole turret just stopped moving. The crew bailed out immediately. These first-hand accounts were invaluable, confirming the M36's effectiveness while identifying areas for improvement. Bill took detailed notes for his report to Thompson and the technical team back at Aberdeen. The field experiences would guide the development of the next generation of tank destroyers. Over the next week, as the German offensive stalled and the Allied counterattack began, Bill accompanied the 702nd through multiple engagements. The weather worsened, with heavy snow and temperatures dropping well below freezing. The conditions tested both men and machines to their limits. The M36s proved decisive in blunting German armored thrusts, their 90mm guns allowing them to engage and destroy Panthers and Tigers from safe distances. American infantry, knowing they had effective anti-tank support, held their ground with renewed confidence. But victory came at a cost. During an engagement near Manhay, an M36 commanded by Sergeant Willis was hit by a concealed German anti-tank gun. The round penetrated the lower hull, igniting ammunition. Bill watched in horror as the vehicle erupted in flames. Only 2 of the 5 crew members escaped. That night in the command post, Carter found Bill sitting alone, staring at his notes. The farmhouse was quiet except for the occasional crackle of radio traffic and the distant rumble of artillery. "Not your fault, sir," Carter said quietly, sitting beside him. "Willis took a risk, exposed too much of his hull trying to get a shot at that Tiger." "I know," Bill replied, "but I can't help thinking about improvements we could make. Better ammunition storage, compartmentalization, improved fire suppression systems." Carter nodded. "That is why you're here, isn't it? To see what works and what needs fixing." He poured 2 cups of coffee from a dented pot. The bitter liquid was barely warm, but in the freezing night, any heat was welcome. "The men talk about you, you know, the officer who fought to get us these Thunderbolts. They know what you did back in Washington." Bill accepted the coffee, grateful for its warmth. "I had help. Colonel Thompson, Mary Davis from engineering. Still, without you pushing for it, we'd be facing those Panthers with 76mm pop guns. A lot more of us would be dead." Carter looked at the wall where a crude map showed the current positions. "We're stopping them, Lieutenant. For the first time, we're meeting them on equal terms." The simple statement reminded Bill of why all the political battles had been worth fighting. He resolved to capture every lesson from the battlefield for the next generation of tank destroyers. As Christmas approached, the weather worsened. Heavy snow and freezing temperatures created new challenges for the M36 crews. Bill worked with the maintenance teams to improvise solutions for cold weather operations, using his practical engineering knowledge to keep the vehicles combat ready. The men celebrated Christmas with K-rations supplemented by packages from home. Someone produced a bottle of cognac liberated from a Belgian farmhouse, and toasts were made to absent friends and family. In the midst of war's brutality, these small moments of humanity kept them going. On Christmas Eve, a messenger found Bill inspecting a damaged turret mechanism. "Lieutenant Harrington, message from Division Headquarters, sir. You are ordered to report to General Collins immediately." Bill wiped his hands on a rag and gathered his notes. "Did they say what it's about?" "No, sir, just that it's urgent." He found transportation to Division Headquarters, a chateau that had somehow survived the fighting intact. Inside, General Collins was meeting with his staff around a map table. The room was warm, heated by a large fireplace, a stark contrast to the frozen foxholes at the front. "Ah, Harrington, good." Collins waved him forward. "Your reports on the M36 performance have been most informative. I've forwarded them to Schaeff with my strongest endorsement." "Thank you, sir. Now I have a special assignment for you. We've captured an intact King Tiger, one of the few ever taken without being destroyed. I want you to supervise its evaluation before it's shipped back to Aberdeen. Your technical expertise with the 90mm gun gives you unique insight into its adversary." Bill felt a surge of professional excitement. The King Tiger was the most formidable German tank, with armor that could withstand most Allied anti-tank weapons. A chance to examine one intact was invaluable. "When do I start, sir?" "Immediately. The tank is being held in a secured area near Liège. You'll work with a technical intelligence team already on site." Collins handed him written orders. "This is priority work, Lieutenant. What we learn from this Tiger could save many lives." Bill spent the next 2 weeks with the captured King Tiger, methodically documenting every aspect of its design. The massive tank was an engineering marvel, with armor up to 150 millimeter thick and a powerful 88 millimeter gun. But it also had weaknesses: an underpowered engine, limited mobility in difficult terrain, and complex systems that required extensive maintenance. Working with the intelligence team, Bill compiled a comprehensive report on the Tiger's vulnerabilities for Allied tank and tank destroyer crews. His experience with the M36 provided crucial insights on how best to engage these fearsome opponents. As January 1945 drew to a close, the Battle of the Bulge was over. The German offensive had been stopped and pushed back, though at terrible cost to both sides. The 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion had played a significant role in the victory, confirming the value of the M36 and its 90 millimeter gun. Bill received orders to return to Aberdeen with his findings and the performance data he had gathered. On his last day at the front, he met with Carter one final time. "The men wanted you to have this, sir," Carter said, handing him a small wooden box. Inside was a spent 90 millimeter shell casing, polished to a high shine. Engraved on the side were the words, "To Lieutenant Harrington, the man who gave us the thunder." Bill was momentarily speechless, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. Tell them it was an honor to serve with them, even briefly." Carter saluted. "The honor was ours, sir. You gave us the tools to survive. We won't forget that." As Bill's transport plane lifted off from a muddy airfield in Belgium, he looked down at the snow-covered battlefield below. The scars of combat were visible even from the air. Burned-out tanks, shell craters, destroyed villages. But the German offensive had been stopped, and the M36 had proven its worth. He opened his notebook, reviewing the pages of observations and improvements for the next generation of tank destroyers. The war wasn't over, but he had accomplished his mission. Now it was time to take these hard-won lessons back to Aberdeen, to Mary and the team continuing the work. And perhaps, finally, to look beyond the war to what might come after. Chapter 9. The Final Victory. Aberdeen Proving Ground, February 1945. The captured King Tiger stood like a dark monument on the test range, its massive bulk dwarfing the American vehicles nearby. A crowd of engineers, officers, and technical specialists surrounded it, listening as Bill Harrington explained its capabilities and vulnerabilities. "The frontal armor is nearly impervious to most Allied guns," he was saying, indicating the thick, sloped glacis plate. "But the M36's 90 millimeter can penetrate it at ranges under 800 yards, particularly with the new HVAP ammunition." Among the observers, Mary Davis watched with professional interest and personal pride. Bill had returned from Europe 2 weeks earlier, bringing with him not only the Tiger evaluation but a wealth of frontline experience with the M36. His recommendations for improvements were already being incorporated into the production line. As the briefing concluded, Thompson joined them as the crowd dispersed. "Excellent presentation, Lieutenant. Your first-hand observations add credibility no laboratory test could provide." "Thank you, sir. The real credit belongs to the crews who faced these monsters in combat. They discovered, through trial and error, what worked and what didn't." Thompson nodded. "Speaking of credit, General Harrison has requested your presence in Washington tomorrow. Something about recognition for the M36 program." Bill raised an eyebrow. "Recognition? From the same people who tried to kill the program 6 months ago?" "Victory has many fathers, defeat is an orphan," Thompson said with a wry smile. "Now that the M36 has proven itself in combat, everyone wants to claim they supported it from the beginning. Even Colonel Blackwood? Especially Blackwood. He's been telling anyone who'll listen that he always believed in a balanced approach to anti-tank warfare." Thompson shook his head in disgust. Politics as usual. Mary had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. "Will you go to Washington?" "I suppose I must," Bill replied, "though I'd rather stay here and continue work on the improvements." "The improvements can wait a day," she said. "This recognition is important, not for the politicians, but for the program. The more support the M36 has now, the better the chances for implementing your recommendations." Bill knew she was right. The war in Europe was reaching its final stages, but there would be more fighting in the Pacific. And beyond that, the lessons learned from the M36 would influence armored warfare doctrine for years to come. "Very well, Washington it is." He turned to Thompson. "Will you be joining us, Colonel?" "Wouldn't miss it," Thompson replied. "Someone needs to keep the record straight about who really made the M36 happen." The ceremony in Washington was held in the Pentagon, in a conference room not unlike the one where they had first fought for the M36 program. General Harrison presided, with various dignitaries and officers in attendance. Bill was surprised to see Patterson among them, now a captain, representing the frontline units that had used the M36 in combat. The 90mm gun motor carriage M36 has proven to be one of the most effective anti-tank weapons in the European theater, Harrison was saying. Its ability to engage and destroy German heavy armor has saved countless American lives and contributed significantly to our victories. Bill listened with mixed emotions as various officials took credit for supporting the program. Blackwood was there, standing near the back, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met briefly, and Bill thought he detected a hint of grudging respect in the older officer's nod. After the formal presentations, Harrison approached Bill with Captain Patterson. "Lieutenant Harrington, I believe you know Captain Patterson. He's been telling me about your early advocacy for improved anti-tank capabilities." Patterson grinned. "Just setting the record straight, sir. If it weren't for Lieutenant Harrington's persistence after our first encounter with Panthers in Normandy, we might still be trying to fight Tigers with 75mm pop guns." Harrison nodded. "That persistence has been noted, Lieutenant. Your technical expertise and combat experience make you uniquely qualified for a new assignment." "Sir," Bill asked, suddenly wary, "we're establishing a permanent armored fighting vehicle development board to continue the work you've begun with the M36. Colonel Thompson will chair it, with authority to draw on the best minds in industry and the military. We want you as the technical director." Bill was stunned. "That's quite an opportunity, sir." "It's more than that," Harrison said seriously. "It's a recognition that we can't afford to let doctrinal rigidity override practical combat needs again. The next time American tanks face an enemy, they need to be properly armed and armored from the start." Later, at a small reception, Bill found himself beside Thompson, watching the various officers and officials networking. "Did you know about this new board?" he asked. Thompson nodded. "Harrison discussed it with me last week. It's a good idea, long overdue, and you're the right man for the technical director position. What about Mary? Her engineering expertise was crucial to the M36's success. Miss Davis has already been offered a senior position on the technical team." Thompson smiled slightly. "I believe her exact words were, 'I'll consider it if Lieutenant Harrington accepts the director role.'" Bill felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the stuffy room. "Where is she now?" "Returned to Aberdeen yesterday. Something about preparation for the next phase of testing." The next morning, Bill took the earliest train back to Aberdeen. The development board position was tempting, but he wanted to discuss it with Mary before making any decision. Their relationship, tentative before his deployment to Europe, had deepened through their correspondence during his absence. He found her in the testing facility, supervising modifications to an M36 based on his combat observations. She looked up as he entered, her professional demeanor momentarily slipping to reveal genuine pleasure at his return. "How was Washington?" she asked, putting down her clipboard. "Full of politicians taking credit for our work," he smiled, but Harrison made an interesting offer. She nodded. "The development board, he spoke to me about it last week." Thompson mentioned that. "He also said your acceptance was conditional on mine." A slight blush colored her cheeks. "I may have implied something along those lines." Bill stepped closer. "Mary, before I make any decisions about the future, there's something I need to ask you." "Yes?" "That dinner we talked about, the one after the war, I'd like to move up the timetable." Her eyes widened slightly. "The war isn't over yet." "No, but our part in it is changing. The M36 is in production, proving itself in combat. Now we're being asked to look beyond this war to the next generation of armored vehicles." He took her hand. "I don't want to wait any longer to see if there could be something more between us than technical discussions and project deadlines." A slow smile spread across her face. "Lieutenant Harrington, are you asking me to dinner?" "I am. Tonight, if you're free." "I believe I can clear my schedule," she replied, her eyes sparkling. "On one condition." "Which is?" "That we don't talk about turret stress coefficients or recoil systems for at least the first hour." Bill laughed. "It's a deal." That evening, away from the base and the pressures of the project, they allowed themselves to simply be Bill and Mary, a man and a woman exploring the possibility of a future together. The war had brought them together, but it was the people they had revealed to each other during that crucible that created the bond between them. Over the next several months, as Germany surrendered and the war in the Pacific reached its climax, Bill and Mary worked together on the new development board. Their professional partnership flourished alongside their personal relationship, each strengthening the other. The lessons learned from the M36 program influenced not only the next generation of tank destroyers, but also main battle tank design. The 90mm gun that had started as an emergency solution to counter German Panthers became the standard armament for post-war American tanks. In September 1940, with the war finally over, Bill took Mary to dinner at the finest restaurant in Baltimore. The rationing and blackout restrictions were gone, replaced by a nation celebrating peace and looking to the future. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "A memento of where we began." He placed a small box on the table. Inside was a miniature M36 turret, exquisitely crafted in silver and mounted on a wooden base. Engraved on a tiny plaque were the words, "The beginning of our journey, M36, 1944. Mary touched it gently, her eyes soft with memory. "It seems like a lifetime ago." "In many ways it was," Bill agreed. "We were different people then." "Not so different," she countered. "You're still the same stubborn engineer who insisted the 90mm gun could work on a tank destroyer. And I'm still the woman who proved you right." He laughed. "Fair enough, but now we have something we didn't have then." "What's that?" "A future without Panthers and Tigers trying to kill us. A chance to build something lasting." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Mary Davis, would you consider building that future with me? Not just as colleagues, but as husband and wife." Her eyes widened, then filled with a warmth that answered his question before she spoke. "Yes, Bill, I would like that very much." Later, as they walked along the harbor under a sky filled with stars no longer hidden by blackout restrictions, Bill reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the hedgerows of Normandy to the test ranges of Aberdeen, from the political battles of Washington to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, it had been a path neither of them could have foreseen. The war had demanded everything they had to give, professionally and personally, but it had also forged something precious between them. A partnership built on respect, shared purpose, and eventually love. As Mary's hand tightened in his, Bill felt a sense of completion. The M36 had been their first creation together, a weapon born of necessity. Now they had the opportunity to create something entirely different. A life built not on destruction, but on construction. Not on warfare, but on peace. The Thunderbolt had served its purpose, protecting American tankers and helping to secure victory. Now it was time for a new chapter, one written not in the thunder of guns, but in the quiet moments of a life shared. Chapter 10, Legacy. Arlington National Cemetery, October 1984. The autumn leaves danced around Colonel William Harrington, retired as he stood before the fresh grave of James Patterson. His old comrade from the Normandy hedgerows, the gunner who had become a friend, was finally at rest. "He was a good man," Mary said softly beside him, her hand warm in his despite the chill in the air. After nearly 40 years of marriage, they still drew strength from each other's presence. "The best," Bill agreed. "One of the few who truly understood what we were fighting for." After the funeral, they walked slowly among the white stones, each marking a life given in service. Bill's steps were no longer as firm as they had been, his hair now silver, his face lined with the passage of years. But his eyes remained clear and observant, taking in the silent ranks of the fallen. "Strange to think," he mused, "that it all began with a tank gun, the 90mm that changed the course of a war." Mary squeezed at his hand. "It wasn't just the gun, Bill. It was the people who believed in it, who fought for it. You, Thompson, the crews who took it into battle." He nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. After the war, he and Mary had built careers and a life together. The Armored Fighting Vehicle Development Board had evolved into a permanent institution, ensuring that the lessons of one war were applied to preparations for the next. Bill had eventually retired as a full colonel, his contributions to armored warfare doctrine recognized and respected. Mary had broken barriers as one of the first female senior engineers in the post-war military establishment, paving the way for others to follow. Together, they had raised 2 children, now adults with families of their own. Their son had followed his father into the Army, serving as a tank commander in Vietnam. Their daughter had inherited her mother's engineering aptitude, becoming a respected designer of military vehicles. As they reached their car, Bill noticed a young officer standing nearby, watching them with an expression of hesitant recognition. "Colonel Harrington?" the young man asked, approaching with a respectful salute. "I'm Captain Sean Miller, 1st Armored Division." Bill returned the salute out of old habit. "At ease, Captain. What can I do for you?" "Sir, I've been studying your work on armored doctrine. The Harrington principles are still taught at Fort Knox. I was hoping to speak with you about your experiences with the M36 tank destroyer program." Bill exchanged a glance with Mary, who nodded slightly in encouragement. How did you know I would be here today, Captain? My grandfather served with you, sir. He always said the M36 saved his life at the Battle of the Bulge. When I heard about Colonel Patterson's funeral, I thought you might attend. A connection across the decades, a reminder that what they had done still mattered. Bill felt a surge of emotion, a blend of pride and humility. I'd be happy to share what I can, he said. But first, tell me about your grandfather. Which unit was he with? As the young captain began to speak, Bill was transported back to those crucial days in 1944 when a small group of determined individuals had changed the course of a war by refusing to accept the status quo. The M36 had been their creation, their legacy to the men who fought. And now, 40 years later, that legacy lived on in unexpected ways. In the young officers who studied their work, in the doctrines that guided modern armored warfare, in the understanding that equipment must serve the needs of the soldiers who used it, not the theories of those who designed it. As the three of them walked together toward the cemetery gate, Bill felt a sense of completion. The circle had closed. The thunder of the 90mm gun had long since faded, but its echo remained in the peace they had helped to secure and in the lives that continued because of their work. Mary's hand found his again, a touch that spoke of shared memories and enduring love. Together they had built something that would outlast them both, a legacy not just of steel and fire, but of human determination and the courage to stand for what was right, even when it meant standing alone. The Thunderbolt had served its purpose, and so had they.